looking, throwing in the end zone.
Montana, touchdown, John Taylor.
Young to the air, Young to Jerry Rice, touchdown San Francisco.
Young stumbles on the way back and fires up the middle. Pass is caught by Owens.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm your host, Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion and analysis, plus timely and entertaining sports and pop culture topics. And this week, we are talking the 49ers 53-man roster. Things have been solidified with some musical chairs based on injuries and IR. We're going to be talking about how every year fans overvalue players in training camp, especially undrafted rookie free agents. We're going to be talking the practice squad. The 16-man practice squad has been rounded out, and what I think about Nick Bosa's holdout and when he should sign. In the plus section, is back this week. We're going to be talking National Cinema Day this past Sunday and what that meant for some movies that have released. I finally watched The Flash on HBO Max or regular Max with my family. Wanted to share my review of that. Ahsoka, the Star Wars show on Disney Plus, first 3 episodes were released. I want to share my thoughts there. And Super Nintendo turned 32 years old last week, and I have some fond nostalgia memories of what is still my favorite video game console of all time. But as always, it starts with the 49ers, so let's get right into it.
Let's talk Niners!
So with the Trey Lance drama firmly behind us, although you wouldn't notice from social media and Twitter, where fans are continually whining about this organization, Trey Lance, Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, who should be fired. Like I said last podcast, drawn and quartered, tarred and feathered. 3 NFC championship games, a Super Bowl appearance in 3 of the last 4 years, and it's still not good enough for folks on a social platform whose sole purpose to exist is to bitch. But the 53-man roster, we're going to go through each position. I'm going to discuss who made the roster and what my picks were and how they aligned. And they aligned actually pretty well. I did better than I thought. I wasn't totally confident when I made my 53-man roster predictions before training camp officially kicked off. So beginning or mid-July, I made my predictions, which I'm going to share. And I surprised myself. Did a little bit better than I thought. But at quarterback, Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold, and Brandon Allen. There was some rumblings, some rumors that the 49ers would go with only 2 quarterbacks, only Purdy and Darnold. In no way, shape, or form did I believe that. Not after what happened last year, not what happened after the NFC Championship game not last year, and not after what's happened the past 4 years for the 49ers. Yes, last year's playoff run, or at least NFC Championship game, was an anomaly, but I've said before, and it bears repeating, any NFL team now, with how cautious the NFL has gotten with concussions, is your starting quarterback getting knocked out and your backup quarterback taking a not terrible hit, but an okay hit, snapping their head back on the grass or turf that's going to put them in concussion protocol. And then said team is left with no quarterback to play for either the rest of the game or for an extended period of time until your backup can clear concussion protocol. Not that far out of the realm of possibility that's going to happen. The 49ers are carrying 3 quarterbacks, and 12 other teams are carrying 3 as well. We'll see if 3 quarterbacks makes the final roster come September 10th when things kick off. Actually, a little bit earlier than that, on Thursday when the Chiefs and Lions kick off for the kickoff game. But Brandon Allen making the 53-man roster makes a whole lot more sense than him making the practice squad. He could get plucked off of that. And then you would have a third quarterback or a practice squad quarterback that has no experience in Kyle Shanahan's offense. So keeping 3 on the 53 made the most sense. My pick there was Trey Lance over Brandon Allen. So that was a miss right off the bat. I didn't anticipate Lance getting traded. I kept saying it makes the most sense for the 49ers to keep him, and if Purdy plays well again this year, you trade him next year. Why upset the apple cart during a season in which you want to make a Super Bowl run? Keep that quarterback room as strong as possible. I do believe that's what Shanahan and Lynch wanted, but once Trey Lance got bumped down to QB3, he wanted out. Lance and his representation requested a trade. And the 49ers, credits them. They could have been dicks and said, no way, dude, we think you're a good asset. We're not getting enough in return for you. We're going to hold on to you until next offseason when there's going to be free agents. Quarterbacks are going to be leaving teams. Teams may be more willing to give us more for what you're worth. So we're going to hold on to you. They didn't do that. Maybe they thought Lance would be a distraction. Maybe he would have. Maybe he wouldn't have. The Niners granted the trade request, and obviously he's with the Cowboys for a 4th-round pick. So I had one error there. At running back, I think the easiest position to predict, it's McCaffrey, Eli Mitchell, Jordan Mason, Ty Davis-Price, and Kyle Juszczyk. Was there some thoughts early on that maybe an undrafted rookie free agent running back like a Kalen Laborn could supplant Ty Davis-Price, who I still maintain is a jag, just a guy? Doesn't look like he's anything special other than a bigger back that's a thumper that excels at gaining 2 or 3 yards. But even then, before training camp started, those were the 4 running backs, 5, including Juszczyk at fullback, that I picked. At wide receiver, we have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, Ronnie Bell, and Ray McLeod. Danny Gray was recently put on injured reserve, either short or long term. I don't think they've announced that yet. He could come back within 4 weeks, or after 4 weeks, they would open up his practice window, which would be 21 days. So he would have to return to the team by week 7 or revert to season-ending IR. So my pick, I didn't have Ronnie Bell. Again, now this is pre-training camp. Ronnie Bell really stood out more so in the preseason games than in training camp. Ronnie Bell, 7th-round rookie out of Michigan, rose to the occasion. Kudos to him. I'm glad I was wrong seeing what Ronnie Bell was able to do in the preseason. So injuries really forced that. I mean, I think even if Danny Gray was healthy, Ronnie Bell, with how he ascended, would have made the team. But with Danny Gray's injury, Ronnie Bell easily slides in as that number 4 or number 5 wide receiver. And with Ray McLeod, has a fractured wrist. Kyle Shanahan today said he's holding out hope that he could be ready for week 1 at Pittsburgh. If not, then you're going to see someone like a Willie Snead or a Chris Conley called up from the practice squad for that first game at Pittsburgh. Tight ends, George Kittle, Ross Dwelly, Charlie Werner, and rookie 7th-round pick Braden Willis out of Oklahoma. Now, I had both rookies making the roster, Braden Willis and Cameron Latou out of Alabama. Latou making it over Charlie Werner, but Cameron Latou got injured his knee, meniscus tear that requires surgery. He is put on season-ending IR. So Charlie Werner gets what is probably going to be his 4th and final year on the 49ers. Offensive line, the Niners went heavy. They're going with 9 offensive linemen, at least initially. I had them going with 8. And your 9 are, starting with the 5 starters, Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Spencer Burford, and Colton McKivitz. Your backups, and these are the ones I accurately predicted, Jalen Moore at left tackle, John Feliciano backing up the 2 guard positions and center, and Matt Pryor, your backup right tackle. Nick Zakiel made the initial 53-man roster. Now, by the time you listen to this, he might be cut or someone else might be cut or swapped out. I did not see Nick Zakiel making the roster, and the way he played in the preseason, I felt really comfortable and confident in my prediction. They went with an extra interior lineman on the initial 53. Okay, that fine, and they still have a couple linemen on the practice squad, which we're going to get to. So now let's transition to defense. Defensive end, I know he hasn't signed yet. Don't worry, fans, he's going to. He's not going to get traded. Nick Bosa, Cleveland Ferrell, Drake Jackson, Austin Bryant, and Kerry Hyder, who can play that hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle role. I had Robert Beal, rookie 5th-round pick out of Georgia, making the team over Kerry Hyder. I thought Hyder might make it to the practice squad. Robert Beal recently today was placed on injured reserve. Actually, Austin Bryant and Kerry Hyder did not make the initial 53-man roster on Tuesday, but with players going to IR, they told Austin Bryant and Kerry Hyder when they released him yesterday, don't go anywhere, guys. Don't leave the building. Don't leave the state. We are signing you back to the 53 once we have to make some housekeeping moves the following day. So Austin Bryant and Kerry Hyder back on the team. Robert Beal, I don't know what the actual injury was, but he's on injured reserve, and chances are he is done. It's basically a redshirt year for him. Done for the year, will be a 49er in 2024. Defensive tackle, Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Kevin Givens, Javon Kinlaw, and Kalia Davis. I got Kalia Davis wrong. I had T.Y. McGill making the roster over him and Kalia Davis making the practice squad for a couple of reasons. Kalia Davis, a veteran. They gave him about $500,000 in guaranteed money. And Kalia Davis was a rookie last year, wasn't on IR all year, but working back from a torn ACL in his knee, didn't show a whole lot in the preseason, didn't start practicing in training camp until late, and I think he only made it until the last preseason game. So I thought, well, Kalia Davis isn't putting much on tape, or probably is going to put up much on tape. Perfect candidate for the practice squad. Lynch and Shanahan did not feel the same way, but listen, it worked out. The same two players are part of the 49ers roster that I wanted, McGill and Kalia Davis, just in a different order in terms of active roster and practice squad. Linebackers, the Niners are going with 6, and I think this is heavy. And here's a position that has potential, although I'm not confident in saying this, of someone getting traded. So who's on the roster? Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Oren Burks, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, and both rookies, D. Winters and Jalen Graham. I thought there was the possibility of the 49ers going with 5 linebackers, and either D. Winters or Jalen Graham maybe making it onto the practice squad. The 49ers probably felt, well, we're probably not going to get that rookie through waivers. Some team's going to claim him. So let's keep both rookies. If they stay on the team, obviously, they are going to stay on the team. If a linebacker gets traded, it's going to be either Oren Burks or Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. If they decide to trade a linebacker, it's curious to me that they went with 6 linebackers and 5 cornerbacks. We're going to get to that considering it's 2023. It's not 1984 where running the ball was much more in vogue than it is now. But with that kind of talent and young, veterans in Warner, Greenlaw, rookies in Winters and Graham, and players in between with Burks and Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, I guess they couldn't give up on that kind of talent mix. Now, again, like I said, they could trade Burks or Flanagan-Fowles. Those are one of the two I would trade, but they are coming with guaranteed money that a team would have to assume and pick up if a team were to trade for one of those players. Something to keep an eye on. More than likely wouldn't happen, but again, I'm surprised they went with 6 linebackers. Cornerbacks, 5, Charvarius Ward, Diamador Lenore, Isaiah Oliver, Samuel Womack, and Ambry Thomas, who, kudos to him, I did not have him making the roster. I had rookie 5th-round pick Darrell Luter making it over Ambry Thomas, but Luter's still on the PUP list, so he hasn't shown anything. He's on the physically unable to perform list, which means he is inactive for the first 4 games. And then similar to IR, they can activate him to practice. And if he does not make it to the active roster, if he is not activated, Darrell Luter would then revert to season-ending IR. But listen, kudos to Ambry Thomas, man. He rose to the challenge. I think he knew. He knew with the drafting of Darrell Luter. He knew what Samuel Womack was bringing to the table. He knew with Isaiah Oliver coming over, competing for Nickelback, and other players, other younger players that didn't make the team, that he had to step up his game. Would I be thrilled week 1 if Ambry Thomas is the starter? No. I want to see either Ward's definitely the starter, either Lenore or Samuel Womack as the starting outside receiver. If Thomas is going to be on the roster, since Ambry Thomas is now on the roster, I'm okay with him as a backup role. I will not feel good if I see him with the starting lineup week 1 at Pittsburgh. Safeties, got this right. I think this was easy as well. Talanoa Hufanga, Tayshaun Gibson are your starters. Rookie free safety Jair Brown out of Penn State, and George Odom as the other backup. Special teams, this is going to be interesting. It's Jake Moody, Mitch Wishnowsky, and Tabor Pepper. So 49ers, right? We keep harping on injury and quarterback injuries and how in general all teams deal with injuries. I guess since we follow the 49ers, we look at their team and say, Jesus, they have so many friggin' injuries. But when's the last time you saw a team that has injuries to 2 kickers? So Jake Moody pulled quad. His status for week 1 is up in the air. Zane Gonzalez was supposed to play in preseason game number 3, strained his calf pre-game, didn't kick. So Mitch Wishnowsky was the place kicker or field goal kicker, the punter when they needed a kicker. And now there's no kicker on the roster that's healthy. There's no kicker on the practice squad. I'm sure they're going to be, and Shanahan has said they've worked out some kickers. They are going to, at the very least, sign a kicker to the practice squad and elevate him for weeks 1 and or 2 until Jake Moody is healthy, and then he will be your kicker. If they haven't signed, Robbie Gould by now, 49er fans, chances are they will not, because Robbie Gould does not want to be signed for 2 games. He wants a season-long commitment. He's going to demand a good amount of money as a veteran, and I don't think the 49ers value what he brings. For sure, the number of game winners that Robbie Gould has kicked, playoffs 2 years ago in Green Bay, in the snow, he's been a very reliable kicker, right? They say good as gold when he's out there kicking and making. 49ers are on a budget, and they're not going to afford or want to pay what Robbie Gould is going to want. So that, so there's the 53. Now, as I was talking, I went around like, who did I get wrong? I got Lance, but that was a trade. I got Ronnie Bell wrong, but he made the team because of Danny Gray getting injured. I got Cam Latu wrong at tight end, but he tore his meniscus. He's on IR. I got Robert Beal wrong. He's on IR. I got Jalen Graham wrong because I didn't think they would carry 6 linebackers. I thought it would be 5. Nothing against him talent-wise. I just thought 5 was the magic number for linebackers. And I got Darryl Luter wrong, but he's on the physically unable to perform list. So that was before he got hurt. So 5 of the 6 I got wrong were completely circumstantial, trades or injuries. Otherwise, these players might have made the roster. So I'm not going to go, I'm not getting on a high horse and say, oh, look how good I did better than I thought. Getting 5 wrong is about getting 90% right. So I got a shade under, because that's 5 out of 53, 6 out of 53. So I got, between 85 and 90% of the roster right. Good for me. Does it mean anything? No. Did I place money on it? No. But I had, I'm not going to lie, a mild satisfaction knowing that, all 6 of the players I got wrong was either due to trade, injury, or because they took an extra player at the position. For what that's worth. Generally, I don't know shit. All right, so this next section is going to go out there for everyone out there that loves undrafted rookie free agents. And listen, I get it. It's awesome, and I do it too, rooting for the underdog, especially when it's a roster that's as stacked as the 49er roster is. Last year, it was undrafted free agent rookie Jason Poe out of Mercer as a guard that people online on certain websites were convinced, far too many people, convinced he was going to make the roster. He didn't. I knew he had no shot. I mean, maybe, no, I guess he had a shot, right? If, 4 people in front of him got hurt, but he wasn't going to make the roster. Practice squad. And this year, much like every other year, is no different. And let me change my voice because we're going to call this segment Undrafted Rookie Free Agents Who Are Training Camp Heroes. And that is Ilm Manning, Keith Ismail, and cornerback Deshaun Jameson, the first 2 being offensive linemen. Now, Ilm Manning actually got signed by the Arizona Cardinals, their 53-man roster. He played tackle in preseason games for the 49ers, showed out relatively well there. The Niners were looking at him more as a guard, and they were hoping he would slip through waivers because he would have been on the practice squad. Cardinals like what they saw, signed Manning to the 53-man roster. Same with Keith Ismail. played center for the 49ers. Now, Ismail is behind Jake Brendel and John Feliciano. He was not going to make this team as a center. But this is Arizona, who is a talent-starved team that is basically tanking when you trade away DeAndre Hopkins, when you release Colt McCoy as your backup quarterback and decide to go with Joshua Dobbs instead with rookie head coach. Is it Shane Steichen? It's one of the coordinators from the Eagles. Kyler Murray's not going to be ready for at least the first 4 weeks and probably beyond that. I don't think they're actively tanking to get Caleb Williams, USC quarterback, with the number 1 pick, but boy, does it look like they are just not going to be competitive at all. So the Cardinals get 2 49er young player castoffs, and cornerback Deshaun Jameson, undrafted rookie out of Texas, showed out well during the early portions of training camp per Kyle Shanahan's admission today. Started to slip a bit. He did show some kick return ability, fumbled a punt return in either preseason game 2 or 3, and just as a cornerback, did not show as much as the 5 ahead of him on the roster. Another player, though, that the 49ers were hoping would slip through waivers so they could sign to the practice squad. He did not. The Panthers signed him to their 53-man active roster. So I know, because I saw it on social media, on Twitter, people hemming and hawing. Does Shanahan and Lynch know what they're doing? Il Manning, what he's supposed to make the team. How did he not make the team over Nick Sakiel? Now that's not a terrible argument, because Nick Sakiel did not look good, guys. But I imagine if Nick Sakiel was put through waivers, he probably would have been claimed maybe by the Cardinals instead of Il Manning. Deshaun Jameson, Keith Ismail, when you are, see again, Twitter, the platform for whining, when you're complaining about second-year undrafted players or undrafted rookie free agents not making your team, get a life, guys. This is a top 2 or 3 roster of the NFL. Top 2, actually, per Pro Football Focus. Number 2 roster in the league. And you guys want multiple undrafted rookie free agents to make it? Or another undrafted player that's a second-year player? Keith Ismail actually has been in the league for a couple years. He's with the Washington Commanders for a season. Listen, Jordan Mason made the team last year. Undrafted rookie free agent running back out of Georgia Tech. That's good enough. It's hard to make this roster, guys. And just to be, I glossed over this, all rookies made the team. Every rookie that was drafted, they didn't have a first-round pick or second-round pick, remember, but rounds 3 through 7, everybody made the roster, whether they're on injured reserve or on the active roster. Every pick made the team. So, again, to people out there that want to crucify Lynch and Shanahan for whether it's the Trey Lance thing, losing undrafted rookie free agent superstar Il Manning, or anybody else that didn't make the team, all draft picks made this team, this deep and heavily talented team, that's a rarity when all your draft picks can make it. So good scouting, good drafting. Listen, even though they had to finagle, like Robert Beal's on IR, probably with a fake bullshit injury. Cam Latu's on IR with a pretty legitimate injury, but he wasn't doing great before that. But he was a third-round pick. He wasn't going anywhere. Cam Latu's a third-round pick. Robert Beal was a fifth-round pick. Darrell Luter was, another fifth-round pick, but was on PUP since the beginning of training camp. So, again, kudos to the front office. Now, practice squad. Because all 16 have been announced, I want to announce all 16 to everybody. So running back Brian Hill, who was signed late in training camp and played in the last preseason game, formerly of the Atlanta Falcons, and was with the 49ers in, I believe, 2021, adds some running back depth, and he's a bigger back, not a speed back, a power back that has familiarity with Shanahan's system. Fullback Jack Coletto, another undrafted rookie free agent out of Oregon State, who Twitter content heroes were convinced you can't release him, Kyle Shanahan. You got to find a spot. I know teams don't have two fullbacks, but you got to find a spot on your team. He's going to get swooped up. Newsflash, most teams don't have one fullback. He was a safe bet to make it through waivers, and he did. And he's on the practice squad, and hopefully he sticks around because he might be the heir apparent to Kyle Juszczyk next year. Tight end Troy Fumagalli. I think, again, smart to have a fifth tight end, number 5 obviously being on the practice squad. Showed out well, blocked well, in line, lining up in the backfield, caught a couple passes in the preseason. I like what I saw. Good practice squad addition. Wide receiver, the 49ers went heavy with 4. So let's go young players first. Rookie free agent Isaiah Winstead, second-year player Tay Martin, and then veterans Willie Snead and Chris Conley. I feel good about this, especially going into week 1. If Ray McLeod is injured, that means there would be only 4 active receivers. You could anticipate either Chris Conley or Willie Snead getting called up to the active roster. Offensive line, they went with a center, Corey Luciano, undrafted rookie free agent out of Washington, and second-year player tackle Leroy Watson. At linebacker, Curtis Robinson. Now, I haven't seen, again, another training camp hero, Marcelino McCrary Ball, 49er fans and faithful singing his praise, and has played well. Did not make it to the practice squad, and I'm not sure if he got claimed by another team. Bad reporting work by me. I apologize. I do want to find that out after the podcast. Defensive end, Alex Barrett, excuse me. He's been on the practice squad the past couple years. Another good addition. Defensive tackles, T.Y. McGill, talked about that earlier. And another veteran, Marlon Davidson, though. He was a second-round talent out of Auburn, drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. Good veteran depth on the D-line. And cornerback Quantrez Knight and Trace Swilling from the Quantrez Knight from the practice squad all of last year, and I think Swilling was on it toward the end of the year. And then a new defensive back, Chris Deshaun Jameson, did not make it through waivers. Shamar Jean Charles was a 2021 fifth-round draft pick of the Packers out of Appalachian State. Gives a third cornerback. So there's your 16. The 17th, and he hasn't been signed back yet, at least that I've seen, would be tackle Alfredo Gutierrez from Mexico, the international pathway. Any team that has an international pathway player gets an automatic extra 17th spot on the practice squad. Now, this is all subject to change in the coming days. So by the time you listen to this and you're saying, no, Al, you're an idiot. Player X is no longer on the team. Well, 1, yes, you're right. I am an idiot. And 2, I'm recording this on Wednesday night. Who knows what's going to happen Thursday, Friday, or before the next podcast is recorded, or whenever you guys listen to the podcast. And again, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Lastly, in the 49ers section, the Nick Bosa holdout. So a moron on Reddit gained some notoriety on Reddit and Twitter yesterday when he said, hey, I'm the guy that broke the Christian McCaffrey trade from the Panthers before it broke, and I got a good source saying that Nick Bosa is going to be traded to a team in the AFC. I don't know who this clown is. I don't care who this clown is. He's not going to get traded. Bosa is not going anywhere, and the 49ers have come out since saying they are working tirelessly on a contract, that Bosa will be signed, and they are hoping he'll be available for week 1 at Pittsburgh. Now, doesn't seem like there's a lot to unpack there, but let's talk about this for a couple minutes. I'm still a bit confused as to the holdup. Nick Bosa is going to be the highest paid defensive player in the league. He was going to be the highest paid defensive player in the league at the end of the regular season last year, after the playoffs, early in the offseason, when he won the Defensive Player of the Year award. That ultimately cemented it, and that was a week before the Super Bowl, right? Or a couple days before the Super Bowl when they announced all the yearly awards. Now, Aaron Donald, defensive tackle of the Rams, most recently signed a 3-year, $95 million contract, which averages to a shade under $32 million a year, and he wound up getting $46.5 million guaranteed at signing. Bosa is going to get more than that. We all know it. He knows it. His agent knows it. Lynch knows it. Parag Marathi, hopefully I said his name, chief negotiator for the 49ers, he knows it too. So don't come in and say, oh, we're going to offer, Nick Bosa 3 years and $85 million. Like, don't be a dick. Like, You know that's Aaron Donald's contract it's not even the floor. If like the subfloor is Aaron Donald's contract, the actual floor for Nick Bosa is like, you know, the linoleum tile or the hardwood that goes right over the subfloor, higher than the subfloor, on top of the subfloor. That's the starting point. And then you're only working up from there because you know Nick Bosa and his representation have a number in mind much high. Well, I don't want to say much higher, but higher than Aaron Donald's. It's just a matter of how much higher. Now, Nick Bosa and his agent, let's not go nuts here. Like, he's not getting $40 million a year. If Aaron Donald's getting a little under 32, maybe Bosa gets 33 and a half, or maybe 34. The guaranteed money is obviously going to be an issue. Not an issue, but a discussion point. How much he gets at signing. How are you going to structure it so it doesn't destroy your cap either this year or next year? Next year, actually, now the 49ers, they were about $13 million over with the players they released because they signed multi-year deals. They're now only $1 million over the cap. Now, again, better to be under the cap than over it, but being over $1 million versus over $13 million, that's a lot better. And they're about $10 million under the cap this year, so they can lower their cap hit this year. But if you do that, then Bosa's cap hit in 2024 is going to be higher. So I'm sure they're doing, it's like a teeter-totter with the math, trying to figure out where they want to put money from a year-to-year basis. But something that, I think what it ultimately comes down to is Bosa probably doesn't want to go through training camp. What player does want to go through training camp other than like a rookie or an undrafted rookie free agent that really has to show out to make the team? Bosa knows the deal. That guy looks like a Greek god, like he was carved out of marble. Like, I'm sure he's keeping himself in good shape. Now, there's a difference between working out and running, cardio, maybe doing boxing or whatever, compared to like getting hit and doing football-related activities in training camp. I think there is an aspect of training camp, even though I've never played football in my life other than flag football, that it toughens up the body. It toughens up the skin somewhat, I would think, right? Because you hear there's many stories, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but we've heard before the players that have held out, come into training camp late, or come in a week before the first game, or week 1, week 2, and their body's not ready and they get hurt. The money is more, and I understand this, right? The money is more important to Bosa than anything else, as it should be. But the fact that this is lingering on so long on both sides, agent and 49er negotiating, it's just increasing the risk, in my mind, for Bosa to come in, to not be ready, to be fatigued or whatnot, and possibly get hurt. And on top of everything, and of course, none of us are wishing for this. I feel bad that I said it because I don't want to jinx anything. I think this situation for Bosa should be when he signs, and I'm sure it's going to be this week or early next week, hopefully before the next podcast, he comes in as a third down situational pass rusher only against Pittsburgh. And then maybe his body's a little bit more ready for week 2 or week 3, and he could just increase his snap count from there. Nick Bosa is a phenomenal specimen. I don't want to... There's no reason why I should even be suggesting a plan for him, but it would make sense to me easing him into action, considering he's missed all of training camp in the preseason. Not like he probably wouldn't have played in any preseason games anyway. And on top of that, guys, after the Trey Lance thing, I'm not going to call it a debacle, but the Trey Lance thing, the Trey Lance trade, there is no way 49ers management is going to follow up trading Lance with trading Bosa. Nick Bosa is much more important to the team this year and the next year than Trey Lance would be, right? Especially if everybody stays healthy. Defensive rookie of the year in 2019, defensive player of the year in 2022. More important player than Trey Lance. They're not going to let Bosa go. They're just not. But I hope he is signed before the next podcast, which will be either next Tuesday or Wednesday. So I'll have something to talk about. We can talk about his money, breaking it down, whatever. It's not even a question of, is Nick Bosa worth it? Because I'm sure once people see the initial numbers, they're going to say, oh, he was overpaid. He's worth it, guys. He's worth it. Now, for people that say Nick Bosa is the difference between like a top 3 unit and a middle-of-the-pack defensive unit, slow down. Because remember, Nick Bosa missed 14 games of 2020, and the Niners were still a top 5 defense. He's important, but no offense or defense. Well, I was going to say no offense is just one player, but then once we saw Peyton Manning get hurt for the Colts, you obviously knew that team was just one player. It's still a team. They could still manufacture pressure. Yes, Nick Bosa is I'm just going to, let's conclude here. Nick Bosa is a key ingredient to the 49ers remaining a top 2 or 3 defense in the NFL. So that concludes the 49ers section of the podcast. Stick around. In the plus section, we're going to be talking about National Cinema Day this past Sunday, $4 tickets. What kind of an impact did that have on certain movies? I watched The Flash on Max. I have some actually positive thoughts about that movie. Star Wars Ahsoka, the first 3 episodes are now on Disney Plus. Have some positive thoughts about that as well. And we're going to conclude the plus section with me waxing poetic about Super Nintendo, my favorite video game console of all time. Stick around.
It's plus time.
All right, let's start off with some movie talk. This past Sunday, in case you weren't aware, was National Cinema Day. I didn't realize this was a thing. I don't recall this from previous years. Then again, I usually don't remember what happened to me last week. But this past Sunday, I don't know if it's nationwide theater chains, but the theaters that are by me, a Cinemark and an AMC Theaters, had $4 tickets all day on Sunday. So I asked my kids if they wanted to see Blue Beetle, and I think one did, one didn't. It was a lukewarm reception, but regardless, I had to see if tickets were available. And at both theaters, Blue Beetle was sold out. Now, it's only its second weekend of release, but still, it didn't do well enough the first weekend that you would worry about going to a Sunday matinee and not being able to get tickets. But in both theaters, and each theater had multiple showings per day, AMC and Cinemark, sold out. So we didn't go see it. I mean, for $4, I'll essentially watch anything. When you're talking, 60% off a ticket, I'm all in. And plus, from what I've heard, it's gotten pretty decent reviews. It's a benign movie. It's a been there, done that. You're not seeing anything brand spanking new, but if the kids wanted to go, I'm sure it would have been an enjoyable time out. It would have been a little weird that, a pack of Skittles would have cost more than a movie ticket, but what are you going to do? But I went back after the fact to look at box office receipts or profits, ticket sales from that weekend. So for Blue Beetle, Friday it made $2.6 million, Saturday $4.1 million, and Sunday $5.4 million. Now, normally, especially for a movie like Blue Beetle that did not have a big opening weekend, you're going down profit-wise from Friday to Saturday to Sunday. Sunday should be the smallest day from a revenue take standpoint because even though it's the summer, there's not as many people that are going to a Sunday night show, than a Friday or a Saturday night show. Plus, in some areas of the country, school's back in session. So, kids wouldn't be going to a Sunday evening show as well. But even just looking at the Sunday dip, so the weekend before opening weekend for Blue Beetle, Sunday solely, opening weekend, Blue Beetle made $6.5 million. Weekend number 2, 5.4. Now, yes, that's a decline, but not as big a decline as you would anticipate. Then I went and looked. I wanted to look at another movie just for shits and giggles. So I looked at Barbie. That's been out for a while, right? This past weekend made $4 million on Friday, $5.4 million on Saturday, and $5.7 on Sunday. Same kind of trend as things are going up monetarily or per day. The previous Sunday for Barbie, it made $6.3 million. So it only went down $600,000. That's about 10%. The drop off at this point from weekend to weekend or weekend day to weekend day, Saturday to Saturday, Sunday to Sunday, weekend apart, is probably in like the 40 to 60% range, given the popularity of the movie. The reason why the drops weren't nearly as steep was because it was National Cinema Day and tickets were $4 a pop. So what's the lesson here? It's that movie theater tickets are overpriced. Now, in my area, I mentioned there's a Cinemark and an AMC theaters, and they are literally within walking distance of each other. Essentially, they're in stationary orbit around a shopping mall. And the Cinemark is only a couple years old. And when we found out that they were building a Cinemark within walking distance of an AMC theater, I thought, well, one, cinema's been struggling since COVID. Two, why are you opening up a theater so close to another theater? Like it should be like magnets, like competitively. They should be repelling each other. You wouldn't want a theater that close to another theater. Regardless, both are seemingly doing pretty well. But now, granted, the drop from $10 or $12 a ticket to $4, that's a big drop for people. And if you have a family of four, that's $16 a ticket plus snacks for four people is probably conservatively another $30. So you're talking close to a $50 day. If tickets were normal priced, that might be, an $80 day. So that's significant savings for folks, right? That's nothing to sneeze at. Movie theaters make most of their profits off of concessions anyway, right? Like, what does a Coke run you? A bag of Skittles, a bag of M&Ms, a bucket of popcorn, like a bucket of popcorn being $8, and it probably costs them 75 cents for all those kernels. I doubt there's going to be any learning from movie theaters, but if they were to drop their ticket prices, say even 20%, from $10 to $8, from $12 to $10 or $9.50, I really wonder if more people would be going to theaters. I've detailed excuses in terms of DC movies, and we're going to get into another DC movie next, why Blue Beetle isn't performing well, because people have been burned by DC movies before. But I think the proof is, at least through Blue Beetle and Barbie, I didn't check Oppenheimer or any other movies that have been out for a month plus to see how their Sunday to Sunday performance held or dropped insignificantly. But I do wonder if they're never going to lower the price of concessions. That's where they're making their biggest margin. But if they were to drop ticket prices a bit, almost like you're not even meeting consumers halfway. You're meeting them you're going 15% and you're asking them to come another 85% to you. It's going to help. Another $10 in people's pockets saving on movie tickets, or $8, depending on the number of people. I think every little bit helps, especially the way the economy is nowadays. And movie theaters are the ones that are around, the Cinemark, the AMCs. A bunch of movie theaters did close, independent theaters. We had a Bowtie Cinema also in the town that I live, but a completely different part of the town, not even close, closed down after COVID. And I know that's happened to a lot of smaller, if you want to call it independently owned cinemas. Cinemarks and AMCs are doing well. I wonder if they could be doing better if they lower ticket prices just a bit. So from movie theaters as a whole to The Flash, the latest DC movie out in theaters. It's a movie that my wife and I actually wanted to see in theaters. I mean, given we're of the age where we grew up when Michael Keaton was our Batman, and obviously you all know that he plays Batman in this movie, but I watched it over the weekend. It was on Max, formerly HBO Max, and just to refresh, the Rotten Tomatoes score is 63% critics, 83% audience. And I would say I lean more towards the audience score than the critic score. To me, this might be the most entertaining DCU movie. If you want to say we're starting with Man of Steel through Shazam 2, Black Adam, Flash, I didn't see Blue Beetle. This might be the most entertaining movie I've seen. Wonder Woman is the best movie, just in terms of like a well-made movie, the story, cinematography, music, direction. Like, that was a really, really solid movie. Wonder Woman 84, not so much. But Flash was really entertaining. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this movie flopped, and it was really because people were burned by other DC movies. Ezra Miller being an asshole, of course, didn't help matters. But as I said in previous podcasts, for folks that did not want to go because of Ezra Miller, then you're cutting your nose off to spite your face, because you didn't get to see Michael Keaton as Batman. You didn't get to see Sasha Calle as Supergirl. You didn't get to see Ben Affleck in a cameo. You didn't get to see Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman in a cameo. there are a lot of good things in this movie. It was a fun movie. But it just came out too late in the DC movie cycle after too many bridges with viewers were burned. Now, this is a very loose adaptation of a comic book called Flashpoint that came out in 2011. 5-issue series written by Jeff Johns, who's one of my favorite comic book authors or writers, and art by Andy Kubert, who's a fantastic artist. And if you didn't piece together the story based on seeing commercials or reading about it, the Flash, whose real name is Barry Allen, realizes in this movie and in the comic book that if he runs fast enough, he can go back in time. And he first ran one day back in time, and he got to see something happened to Gotham City, and he was helping Batman out, clean stuff up, and he was able to see that he ran back a day in time. And soon after, like, he recognizes that, he goes to Gotham City, talks to Bruce Wayne, and says, hey, I can go farther back. I can save my mom, who wound up, getting killed in a home invasion. Bruce, I can save your parents. And Bruce Wayne, says, you could, but you can cause catastrophic damage. The whole butterfly effect. If you change one thing, how's it gonna affect, the future? So he still does it. He goes to his house where he grew up, and he was having flashbacks of what happened to his mom. And then he just starts running and goes back in time. I'm not sure how many years specifically, but when he goes back in time, he doesn't account for the fact that he winds up seeing a younger version of himself, a version who is a freshman in college. I guess he thought if he was going back, it would just be him and he can live with his, parents. And there's that younger version of himself that he intercepts and talks to, and realizes that the day that he went back in time is the day that the accident occurred in his crime lab that caused him, or that turned him into the Flash. So in walking around initially with the younger version of himself, from this, if you want to call it alternate timeline, alternate Earth, it's also running parallel to the events of Man of Steel, which is when Zod, the bad Kryptonian, comes down and wants to terraform the Earth, and Henry Cavill as Superman is the one that fights and stops him. But on this Earth, there is no Superman. There's no Justice League. There's no Aquaman, no Wonder Woman, no Cyborg. There is a Batman, and both Ezra Miller characters, both Barry Allen's, realize that, and they go to Gotham City to find Batman or Bruce Wayne. At this point, the older Flash from the future knows Bruce Wayne is Batman, knows that there's a Batcave under, Wayne Manor, all that good stuff. But before that, the older Flash realizes that the younger Flash needs to go through the accident that turned him into the Flash to have a superhero on this Earth to help fight against Zod, to have two Flashes fight against Zod. But when he goes to the crime lab and when that accident happens, when the lightning strikes through the window and hits all the chemicals and bathes both Flashes, or both Barry Allens, in the chemicals, the young Flash gets powers, the old Flash loses his powers. And what's funny is, obviously, Ezra Miller uses the pronoun they, which I know, some people, I don't say have an issue with, but just find it, it's a weird pronoun because it kind of sounds plural. The most applicable use of this pronoun is in this movie because there are two Ezra Millers. So when you talk about their performance, it's actually feels right to use they or them because there are two of them, playing Barry Allen and playing the Flash. So that, obviously they go to Gotham City, they get, Michael Keaton, Batman involved. And then they start tracking down what happened to Superman because Superman's rocket didn't crash in Metropolis. They had to figure out where it crashed. It actually wound up crashing in Russia, and the Russians were holding Superman hostage. And when they get to Russia and break him out, they realize that Superman isn't a man, it's a woman. It's Sasha Kali, Superman's cousin, Supergirl. And then, where I'll leave it is they wound up, getting out of Russia, getting back to the United States, to Gotham City, and Bruce Wayne and Barry Allen, the older Barry Allen, wound up recreating the conditions to turn the Flash into the Flash, basically having Barry Allen be struck by lightning. And he regains his powers, and then everybody teams up to fight Zod and the bad Kryptonians to try to end that threat. That's where I'm going to end it, because I think that's everything that, in case you haven't seen the movie, that's everything that you would have pieced together watching a trailer, seeing commercials. So I don't want to give anything away for anything else that happens. Now, for folks that are wondering, and probably none of you are, of how it differs from the comic book, I'll tell you. So in both the comic book and the movie, Flash goes back for the same reason, to try to save his mom from dying, and he succeeds in both the comic book and the movie with consequences, changing the past. In the comic book, on that alternate Earth, Bruce Wayne dies as a child during that alley mugging. His father, Thomas Wayne, becomes a very violent Batman, who used to be a doctor, is no longer a doctor. He runs Wayne Casino, betting casino, like AC Las Vegas, in Gotham City. And his wife, Bruce Wayne's mother, survives the shooting, but it mentally breaks her, and she becomes the Joker in that world, in that alternate timeline. Wonder Woman and Aquaman do exist in the comic book version, and they are at war with each other because Aquaman, Arthur Curry, wound up cheating on his wife, Mera, with Wonder Woman, and Mera saw it. She confronted Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman basically beheads her, and that causes Wonder Woman and the Atlanteans go to war with Aquaman and the Atlanteans, then declare war on Wonder Woman and the Amazons. And it's a war between superhero factions or metahumans that could destroy the Earth. Superman is in custody in the comic book, but he's not in Russia. Like in the movie, he's in the US. And he is male. He is still Kal-El. And when they find him, he is super scrawny, hasn't seen the sun. They get him out. When he's in the sun, much like Supergirl, he recharges his powers, but he's scared. He doesn't know how to interact with people, and he just basically flies away. He just doesn't help them. But then ultimately in the comic book, Flash, Batman, Cyborg, the Shazam kids who turn into Shazam all band together and go overseas to Europe, where Wonder Woman and the Amazons are fighting Aquaman and the Atlanteans. And I'll leave it there. It's a well-done comic book. And if you don't have any inclination to pick up a comic book, you can get it on Amazon, a trade paperback, all 5 issues compiled together for maybe $15, $20. If you don't want to read a comic book, the channel Max, which used to be HBO Max, has a faithful cartoon adaptation of the Flashpoint comic called The Flashpoint Paradox, about an hour and a half. Faithful, well done. So if you have any interest in what I mentioned, either the Flash movie, comic book, or cartoon movie, you do have options. The couple things that I do kind of wonder about the movie is, so one, it's a 2 hour and 20 minute movie. Didn't feel long, like Oppenheimer was 3 hours. That certainly felt long. Other 3 hour movies feel long. But people complained about the special effects, especially in the last act, the last third of the movie, or the last half hour, let's say. And they have a right to complain. It's not that it looked half finished. There was a lot of cameos that were going on towards the end, and they were computer generated. And there's that phrase, uncanny valley, when you're looking at a computer generated human or humanoid. It doesn't look quite right. It almost looked like it was made out of clay or a cut scene from a video game. So that it didn't necessarily take me out of it because I heard those complaints going into it, so I knew what to expect. But it just didn't look totally right. And even though this was a loose adaptation to the Flashpoint comic book, I do wonder if they followed the comic book a bit more closely, if having Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman leading the Amazons and having Jason Momoa as Aquaman leading the Atlanteans against each other would have been a bigger box office draw for the movie than the flop it wound up being. It would have driven up the production cost, but I think there might have been maybe a bit more return from the audience. The comic book and the cartoon movie were more adult and serious. This was much more lighthearted, and it was entertaining, and it leaned into Ezra Miller's, I don't know about his personality because I don't know him as a personal, I don't know him or how he is other than, obviously being an asshole and striking women and kidnapping teenagers or whatever it may be. But he played that quirky character that was, joking around, and there's two of them in that movie. So, it was definitely lighthearted. But as we saw, the tone did not help the profits. Maybe Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa would have in that regard. So Flashpoint Paradox, if you want to check it out, I give thumbs up to all three of those iterations. So moving from movie to TV, Ahsoka, the newest Star Wars streaming show on Disney Plus, released its first 2 episodes on Tuesday, August 22nd. The third episode was released yesterday, August 29th. Rotten Tomatoes has an 89% critic score and a 76% audience score because Star Wars fans are the worst. Essentially, this is season 5 of a show called Star Wars Rebels, which was animated. It was on from, I think, 2013 to 2017, and it was a show that took place 5 years before the original Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope. And it follows a band of rebels, 2 Jedi, or like a Jedi and a Padawan, a Jedi in training, a pilot, a Mandalorian, a Chewbacca-like creature, even though he doesn't look like Chewbacca, and a droid Chopper, who's like the R2-D2 equivalent. You don't need to watch this show to follow what's going on. The creative team, and it's helmed by Dave Filoni, who really learned at the feet of George Lucas. When I say that, you can take that as a good thing or a bad thing, but he gets Star Wars. If you've ever seen pictures of him, he'll be with Jon Favreau, famously of Swingers. He wrote and directed, I think, the first 2 Iron Man movies. He was in the Iron Man movie as Happy and in the new Spider-Man movies. I think that was the character's name. But Jon Favreau is responsible for bringing the Mandalorian to life. But those two are kind of always mentioned together, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni is the one that always kind of wears a cowboy hat. He understands Star Wars, and he does a nice job of introducing the characters to folks that did not watch Rebels. And there are going to be a lot of them because it's a cartoon show. It's not going to appeal to a lot of people beyond maybe kids and, I'll say, diehard Star Wars fans. But if you like Star Wars, it is even though it's an animated show, it feels like Star Wars. There's a lot of other things that have been created that don't. This animated show, Rebels, does. Now, Ahsoka, this show, takes place about 6 years after Return of the Jedi, Episode 6, where Luke kills the Emperor, Darth Vader dies, Endor, Ewoks, all that good stuff. Now, here's generally the plot without giving anything away. And granted, at this point, I'm recording this on Thursday, August 30th. There's only 3 episodes in. But 2, we'll call them essentially Dark Jedi, Baylan Skoll, who's played by the late Ray Stevenson, and Shin Hati, played by Ivana Sakno, get onto a New Republic ship and break a Sith witch, which is considered a Night Sister. They break her out of prison, essentially. and her name is, the character's name is Morgan Elsbeth. And they are going on the search for Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now, why this is important for two reasons. One, he was a character from the Heir to the Empire trilogy of books that came out in the early 90s, authored by Timothy Zahn. And he is an admiral of a fleet. He's a tactician. He is a character that learns about his enemies through art, and they kept all this about him, and I'm going to get into the where and the why. And he showed that that trilogy almost single-handedly resuscitated Star Wars from the dead. Because remember, Return of the Jedi came out in 1983. This first book came out in 1991. It was this book and the Dark Empire comic book series from Dark Horse Comics that came out around the same time, also 91, 92, that started to drum up interest again in Star Wars. And the Grand Admiral Thrawn character is one of the fan favorites, and he's at this point 32 years old. And for the longest time, people wanted him to be brought into quote-unquote canon, into the new movies, the sequel trilogy, etc. And he didn't make it there, but he did make it into the show Rebels in its last, either the last season or last two, I think the last two seasons. And Grand Admiral Thrawn was last seen in the final series finale episode of Rebels being taken away into hyperspace. And I know this next part's going to sound weird, by huge essentially space whales called Purgils. And essentially along for the ride was the young Jedi in training. His name was Ezra Miller, called these whales, these Purgils, to help their band of rebels get the Empire away from the planet they were on called Lothal that was under siege. They were trying to liberate. And these space whales came, took all the Empire Star Destroyers away, and the Empire and the rebels win on that, in that series finale episode of Rebels. So that was 2017. Now we're in 2023, and Grand Admiral Thrawn is going to appear again. He has not appeared yet in the 3 episodes I'm in. And Ahsoka, I know I'm going a long way around, but for folks that have not seen the show and don't know much about the extended Star Wars universe, say beyond the movies, Ahsoka is a character that appeared in the Clone Wars cartoon series from the early, I don't know if it was the late 2000s, early 2010s. And she was Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, apprentice, before Anakin Skywalker fell to the dark side and turned into Darth Vader. She was a teenager, young teenager, that Anakin was training, and something, I forgot the particulars of this, but something wound up happening. A bomb went off in the Senate or something, and the Jedi Council actually thought that Ahsoka was involved. And she got disenchanted with the Jedi and left the Order before Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin Skywalker turns into Darth Vader. And part of her character arc is being regretful that she left the Order, because she thinks if she stayed, she could have prevented Anakin from turning into Darth Vader. And she knows that he's Darth Vader. Ahsoka is played really well by Rosario Dawson. So that was before Episode 3. And now we're jumping to 6 years after Return of the Jedi. So you're talking about a 25 to 30 year jump from when she was Anakin's apprentice to where she is now. So she's, say, in her late 40s. And it revolves around her and a character from Rebels, a Mandalorian character, a female Mandalorian. So think of the show The Mandalorian. So that armor, just female. And the character's name is Sabine Wren, played by Natasha Liu Bordizzo. And she's, if you get it, if you're watching Ahsoka or going to or interested in the show Rebels, the casting for this Sabine Wren character was fantastic, as was Rosario Dawson. Rosario Dawson became Ahsoka because there was a fan, I don't know if it was a petition or folks just started mentioning to Star Wars creators like, hey, if you're going to bring Ahsoka into live action, it's Rosario Dawson. She could be the older version. And they listened. They listened to the fans. Rosario Dawson is awesome. Natasha is awesome as Sabine Wren and looks like her, which is difficult to look like an animated character. And they are getting rumblings that Grand Admiral Thrawn's going to return. They want to stop him, but at the same time, they also want to find Ezra Bridger, who was last seen with Thrawn. So they are on the hunt. This show to me feels like Star Wars. There's been multiple lightsaber battles already. It's nice to see more content in the period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, because we're not really, and we're getting The Mandalorian, but that's kind of like a Western on the outskirts of the galaxy. This is nice that they're still involved with the New Republic at this point. I was going to say Rebellion, the New Republic, what the state of that is. You get to see Mon Mothma as the Chancellor. It feels like Star Wars. Like I said before, showrunner, writer, director, Dave Filoni gets Star Wars. Now, is all well in the Star Wars fandom? Of course not. People are complaining about the pacing. This is an 8-episode TV show, right? And it's also being made for the casual fan that did not watch Rebels. So there has to be exposition, explanation, why the characters are where they are when the show begins, and then explaining some of what their backstory is without it being a complete exposition dump. So the pacing has to be, and with that, there's still lightsaber battles, there's still blaster gunfights, there's still, spaceship dogfights. I'm enjoying it. But if you're going to complain about the pacing, not everything has to be an ADHD, gonna give you a seizure pace of things, which seems to be the pace, especially that for younger audiences nowadays, that is a little too frenetic. This is Star Wars, but it's also a drama. So it doesn't have to be so like you're watching a cartoon on Nickelodeon or Disney Junior. This show does use the same map plot device that The Force Awakens did, trying to find Luke Skywalker. They had part of a map. They need to find the whole map to get to Luke and all that good stuff. This, in the first episode, Ahsoka kind of finds a map that needs to be unlocked to get to Grand Admiral Thrawn, to get to, their friend and fellow rebel Ezra Bridger. And what folks find out is that Thrawn and Ezra are in another galaxy, a neighboring galaxy. So the Star Wars universe, all the tales told in it, comic books that are considered canon, movies, TV shows, it all takes place in one galaxy. Lots of planets, lots of suns. It's not like our galaxy or our solar system where it's just a sun and whatever it is, 8 or 9 planets. Tons of planets, lots of suns, but it's contained in one galaxy. This is going to be the first time in official Star Wars lore and canon where they're leaving the Star Wars galaxy to head to another galaxy. There are scenes and shots that pay homage to things that came before. You've probably seen in the trailer, Ray Stevenson's character, Balin, flashing his lightsaber in the hallway of a rebel ship, cutting down rebels, very reminiscent of what Darth Vader did in the movie Rogue One. His apprentice, the female Shin Hati, is going to search out Ahsoka and try to kill her before she gets involved too much. And she lands on the planet that Ahsoka's on, sends out a small probe droid to kind of find her. And it was very reminiscent to the scene from episode 1, The Phantom Menace, when Darth Maul in the beginning, close to the beginning of the movie, lands on Tatooine. And he's looking for the princess. And that's the first time he has a lightsaber battle with Qui-Gon, Liam Neeson's character. Now, I know this isn't even on notes. This is just me because I'm a big Star Wars geek, but I'm sure a lot of you have seen those movies and probably remember those scenes. When I mentioned about the map is showing that Thrawn and Ezra are in another galaxy, and the path that they have to take is a hyperspace pathway that those huge whales, space whales, Purgils, travel along. When it actually makes sense, because those are the space whales took Thrawn's Star Destroyers and Ezra somewhere, and now everybody or some people on the show know where they're going. But to travel from one galaxy to another, you apparently need a very powerful ship in terms of hyperdrives, and that's going to be a need for folks that want to get where they're going. When I mentioned it's only 8 episodes, that's about, par for the course nowadays, right? And running time of Star Wars episodes have come under scrutiny, especially some episodes of The Mandalorian. First episode for Ahsoka, 55 minutes. Second episode, 45 minutes. Third episode, 35 minutes. I'm sure it's not going to go under 35, but that is caused the ire of some of the fans. And, I want more Star Wars content, not less. If you can hit the sweet spot, 45 minutes, that's generally the length of an hour-long program on network TV when you take away commercials. 35 minutes feels a little bit cheap. And now the main question here is where is this going to end? There's going to be, where and how is this going to end in terms of the story? There is going to be a movie that Dave Filoni is going to write and direct that's going to tie up essentially what we're calling the Mandoverse. So the Mandalorians show, the Ahsoka show, and there might be another show, Skeleton Crew, that's coming out next year that I think is taking place in the same time period, the same era. So I don't know if there's going to be a season 2 of Ahsoka. They haven't announced that. I'm hoping so. Why not? More Star Wars content is better than less. Ratings wise, and I know it's on Disney Plus, so ratings are a little bit different than Nielsen ratings on broadcast TV, but about half as many people watched the premiere of Ahsoka as did the premiere of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show from last year. I enjoyed the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, did not have great reviews and have great reception by the fans, because again, Star Wars fans are the worst. You think 49er fans are bad, Star Wars fans put you to shame. So I'm hoping for a second season. We do know there's going to be a movie in the future, whether it's 2026 or 2027, that will really tie up and conclude this era of Star Wars storytelling, which is, again, between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. So let's conclude this podcast with video games. And last week, Super Nintendo underwent or had its 32nd year anniversary. The Super Nintendo was released in North America August 23rd, 1991. And I said multiple times, it is my favorite video game system of all time. There's a lot of nostalgia that goes into that statement. There's a lot of growing up with a video game system, getting into video games, and the catalog that console put out is absolutely fantastic. Now, when I was very young, I had Atari. I don't remember if it was 2600 or 5200, had Nintendo. Super Nintendo came out when I was 12 or 13 years old. So, anytime between say 8 and 14 or into your mid to late teens, those are obviously the formative years where nostalgia really, really hits for people that are kind of going back to things that they enjoyed in their youth. But Super Nintendo, I think, is really when I started getting into gaming. Looking at, kind of units sold in terms of popularity, Super Nintendo ranks 10th in terms of consoles sold all time at 49.1 million. Nintendo, the original Nintendo, is 8th with 61.9 million. And for those of you that are wondering, Sega Genesis, I don't have the number ranking, but sold 30.75 million consoles. So about 18.4 million less than Super Nintendo. And Genesis, I forget this. Genesis, because I didn't have one, came out in 1989. It had a 2-year head start on Super Nintendo, and Super Nintendo just, in terms of units sold, kind of blew it out of the water. I was always a Nintendo person, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and that's actually where I stopped, funny enough, until I bought a Game Boy Advance handheld because a new Zelda game came out for it, and Nintendo Switch, but that's because, my children wanted to play it. I didn't have a GameCube. I didn't have a Nintendo 64. I don't know if I'm forgetting a Nintendo console in between there. But like I mentioned, so going back to, getting a Super Nintendo, I was in junior high school when the Super Nintendo launched. It came with Super Mario World, which people will argue that it might be the best game on the Super Nintendo console. It's right up there. I mean, you could put it in the top 5, top 10. I'm not going to argue with anybody. This is a time period where Nintendo Power was in its prime, either coming home for lunch or coming home after school, reading through Nintendo Power magazines. I remember how excited I was when The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Zelda's first game on Super Nintendo, came out. Pouring through the preview, pouring through the actual game walkthrough that came out after the game was released. And I mentioned about catalog of games. I'm just going to name some, and these are ones that I just kind of scratched off the top of my head. Chrono Trigger, a phenomenal role-playing game. Super Mario Kart. All the Mario Kart fervor started here, and this was a game that if you played it, you had to go through 5 laps of a course, not 3, because kids have no attention span nowadays. 5 laps, and it still only took like 2.5 minutes. What the hell? Super Metroid, fantastic game. Final Fantasy 2 and 3, great RPGs. Donkey Kong Country, Mega Man X, Earthbound, Secret of Mana, and my 3 favorite games. And I'm not talking 3 favorite Super Nintendo games, although that's true. My 3 favorite video games of all time just happen to be on this console. F-Zero, launched soon after the Super Nintendo launch. I think it was either a 91 or 92 game, racing game. Only 1 player. You can only choose between 4 cars, but it's a game I still play to this day, and I play it a lot. It is just a fun, well-made game. Street Fighter 2. Now, you can't give Super Nintendo the nod on this because obviously Street Fighter 2 was originated in arcades and was also on Sega Genesis, but how much I played that game at the Fun and Games arcade that was attached to the mall nearby where I live now and where I grew up. But on Super Nintendo, the original Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2 that introduced 4 new characters, sunk so much time into that game. And I mentioned earlier, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which, any 3 of these games, I mean, if you want me to, F-Zero might be 3rd, but between the amount of time I've played a Street Fighter, the number of times I played Zelda: A Link to the Past since I first beat it when I was 12 or 13 years old, and, a lot of love for the Zelda Switch games. Breath of the Wild, I've played it, haven't beaten it yet, but phenomenal game. And Tears of the Kingdom rather, sorry. I know that's gotten phenomenal reviews as well. To me, this is still A Link to the Past, the height of Zelda games. And folks out there with a Nintendo 64 will say Majora's Mask, and I'm forgetting the other one that folks like more than Majora's Mask. Played them both. They do not age well because Nintendo 64 had, it was 64-bit, but weird polygons. The games look like crap. They play well, but there's a reason why independent game developers are creating 16-bit games the past several years. It's Super Nintendo nostalgia. I'm not going to leave Genesis out. It's Genesis nostalgia. It's the bright, colorful, fun sprite artwork and graphics that appeal to so many people. Super Nintendo Zelda: Link to the Past has aged like wine. It's still, I'll use the word adorable, but just looks wonderful now, 30 plus years later, which is why the 2 Zelda games on Nintendo 64, I played them. I didn't have a Nintendo 64, but I played them. But when you look at videos of them now, they look terrible. And they came out, 7-8 years or more after A Link to the Past. So while it's not a milestone anniversary for Super Nintendo, 32 years, the amount of time I spent playing it when I was younger, through my 20s, through my 30s, and into my 40s, and bought a Super Nintendo Mini, even though it contains a lot of the games that I still own or have on an emulator, introducing my kids to the original Super Mario Kart, having them play Street Fighter 2, having them play Legend of Zelda, Super Punch-Out is on there, Super Metroid. It's a fantastic console, obviously from my youth, and one that, am I going to get tired of it at some point? I guess when I'm in my 60s, 70s, or 80s? Sure. I don't know if I'm going to be playing video games then, but just, it's a console with games to me that have stood the test of time. And I know folks out there, like when you're growing up, you're either a Nintendo person or a Genesis person, and nowadays you're either a PlayStation person or an Xbox person. You may be both, or a PC gamer playing on laptops or gaming desktops, which is totally fine. But back in the early 90s, man, the console wars were Super Nintendo and Genesis. And although Genesis had the head start, Super Nintendo was, statistically at least, the clear winner, and the winner for me, heart and mind alike. So that concludes the podcast for this week. Like always, I want to thank you, if you are listening, for taking time out of your very busy day to listen to me drone on about the 49ers. And this week, back with the plus section, talking movies, box office, video games, Star Wars TV. We're going to be back next week on either Tuesday or Wednesday, as we're getting close to the NFL kickoff. NFL kicks off a week from tomorrow, next Thursday. Lions at Chiefs, and the 49ers will be at Pittsburgh Sunday, September 10th. So we will have, obviously, another podcast even Thursday, before the NFL season kicks off officially. But until then, like always, stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Take care.